Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Soldiers of Cinema podcast. I'm Cullen, and I'm joined, as always, by Clark Coffee.
Woohoo!
How's it going?
It's going pretty well, man.
Seems to be
it's going great, man. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good too. That seems to be like the go-to. I mean, we might as well just record that intro because I say it the same every single time we do it.
Well, hey, you know what? Or you could mix it up, man. I mean, you could just come out of left field next time, you know?
Yeah, next time I do it,
and just really mix it up. I mean, you know, hey, I mean, it's nice. We we want this to be like a cozy, welcoming place for people to come in. You know, it kind of starts and ends the same way. You've got that familiarity. You know, it's like Cheers. You know, you want to go where everybody knows your name. But hey, I mean, we can also mix it up. You know, I mean, who knows what we could open up next episode with.
It'll be a huge shocker. Yeah.
It'll be a huge shocker. Maybe we can, like, by the time we get to the end of this episode, we will have, like, organically come to some insane cliffhanging ending. And then, so next episode, it will be like like those old fashioned, like, to be continued TV shows back in the day.
Next time on.
And it's like,
Yeah, that'd be great. We do have narrative. We pull the Herzog. We put the narrative in the real life.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, so, I mean, speaking of Herzog, of course, this is the Warner Herzog podcast. But today we are talking about Family Romance LLC, which was his not newest.
2019.
Yeah, 2019.
And you were going to say newest narrative, I think, right?
I think it is. I think it is his newest narrative, right?
That's a good question. I'm not entirely positive because I feel bad now. I'm like, geez, you put me. On the spot.
I would assume so. I can't imagine that he'd have a new one this year.
Yeah, I don't think so. You know, he did Nomad, which of course we covered last episode, and he did that in 2019 as well. I don't know, the exact.
And then Fireball was 2020, but that was
Fireball is 2020, and there's a short where
that is his newest.
Yeah.
I'm checking his IMDb now.
He's got a couple other films that are in development, and I don't know a ton about them. Fordlandia.
Yeah, which about Henry Ford building a factory in the Amazon.
which sounds like extremely interesting, by the way. I can't wait for that flick to come out, and we'll do an episode on it. But yeah, so I think it's safe to say we can say Family Romance LLC, his latest narrative film. Although I know it confused a lot of people, I think, and we're going to talk about this with its style and with the technical aspects of the film, and some of the ways that it's written, some of the ways that it's performed. It definitely gives off. And we talked about this. I don't even want to say a documentary vibe because I don't even know that it's documentary. It kind of gives off a reality TV vibe, frankly.
Yeah, which interestingly, because and again, this is something we kind of in our preliminary chat we just kind of brushed by, but it's interesting because Herzog has said that he's a really big fan of reality TV and like keeping up with the Kardashians and all that stuff. Which is hilarious.
Where he said that? Okay, it is hysterical, and I totally buy it. And I totally buy it because I know he's, I've heard him say kind of similar things that he's inspired by the real on camera. Do you remember where he said that?
I can't remember what interview it was, but it might have been like for like a Netflix documentary he was doing. Kind of
doing the press rounds.
I don't know. Right. But no, I think that was one of the things that me and you agreed on, which was that it was like a lot of people are saying, oh, it sort of feels documentary, but it doesn't really.
No.
It feels like reality television because it feels staged and it feels
which reality
written.
TV is, of course.
But
right?
exactly, it feels, and I wouldn't say mockumentary either, because that's such a completely different thing. Definitely like genuine, reality TV is like the closest I can imagine to this being, which is like, the cameras aren't really supposed to be noticed, so it's kind of divorced from that.
Yeah.
But there's moments where it just,
well, so let's jump into it. Yeah, let's jump into it. So let's start off. We can talk about some of the topics on the technical side here. So because I think it's really important, and it's important in a handful of different ways, right? How a film looks, how a film sounds. Obviously, has a huge impact on the content of the film. These things go hand in hand. So let's talk about it a bit. So we both agree that this kind of has a very much like a reality TV vibe, and a huge part of that is how it was shot. And so Cullen, you took a look and you found some BTS photography of Herzog filming, and he did operate on this film.
Yeah, I had to do some detective work.
Yeah, did a little detective work, which is awesome. We're prepared here, man.
Yeah.
And I wasn't surprised because I had seen the film, so I knew what the footage looked like. But but he's using a kind of, I guess, what I would call a prosumer camera.
Yeah, so it's it's a few $1,000 like
it's about a
camcorder
3K
almost.
USD,
and
but
it's
a
an
Canon.
Canon XF 405 is the model, which is a 4K
fixed lens.
Yeah, exactly.
It's 4K fixed lens. It's very much a camcorder. It's not a cinema camera by any stretch. And Herzog, at least I saw the film. I rented it on Amazon Prime. But I think these Q&As or the intros are available because you were able to find the Q&A.
I rented it. So I got a Mubi free subscription, like free trial.
Okay.
And watched it on Mubi.
So you were able to watch it on Mubi, who distributed this film. So Herzog talks a little bit about, his choice here. And I think there are a couple practical reasons that he directly mentions. And Cullen, you and I are going to maybe make some guesses, some educated guesses as to why else, some other reasons he picked this camera. But he wanted something first and foremost that he could operate by himself, that had XLR inputs, which are basically a pro type of audio input, where you can whether it's your boom, or your lavs, you can plug directly into camera. And I think too, he stole a lot of shots. We know that he stole maybe all of the location shots.
I don't think there was any permit getting, any
at the train station,
streets and things like that. It all seemed very guerrilla.
So he needed something small that wouldn't, because he discusses specifically how difficult it is to shoot in Tokyo, that getting permits is very difficult and can be very expensive. So his exterior is where he's shooting at the park. There's a scene that takes place in a train station, which I found really intriguing. We're going to get to all these scenes in a minute here, but he had to have something small that didn't look like a film crew, where he could probably kind of pass off as a tourist. And I definitely
likely that the actors were just wearing wireless labs. Because
that's my guess, right?
In the image, again, you can see what looked like audio transmitters in the XLR ports. So very and we also mentioned the other day too that looks like no shots are artificially lit. Like there was no manipulation of light.
I don't think so
at all. Right. Even in the interior scenes, like it doesn't even look like they put up like flags or anything like that. Looks like it was very much a find a location. We've got our camcorder and we're going for it. Which can, to be fair, I can understand why some people were put off by that. There were things in this movie that I really liked, but then there were things that didn't quite work, super well for me.
Yeah, let's go into some of the detail, because the film does, shooting it with the prosumer camera with the fixed lens, we've got really, really, really wide depth of focus. Pretty much, so it's got a very video look. We see, it's all handheld. Some of the, it's all pretty long takes, reframing on the go, kind of run and gun. All these things add up. There's some challenges here with exposure in a lot of scenes.
Looks like it was mostly shot auto exposure as well.
It's possible.
I can't guarantee that.
Can't verify that.
But
sure.
There's moments where it looks like the camera's sort of searching for
I agree.
exposure.
When we move focus from when we're in an interior and we move to kind of focus on a more lightly lit, like say window, for example, I think you do kind of see the camera closing down a little bit, but so it's possible. It's totally possible. So let's kind of the impact that has on the storytelling is what I think's important. We can kind of speculate as to what kind of budget constraints might have existed for Herzog. Even though he's Herzog, he's specifically
I know that he said in an interview that his reason that he did The Mandalorian, which of course isn't really like him to do a big franchise like that. But
once in a while, like Jack Reacher.
Once he did Jack Reacher, But he says that he did that to fund this movie. Like that was his reasoning for doing The Mandalorian was
so there you go. There's kind of proof then, I guess, so to speak. And he's spoken to this about other films. Even for him, it's difficult for him to get funding. So obviously, this is a much lower budget way to shoot a film. You have a very small crew, and we know he likes to operate from time to time, and so that was appealing to him. We also know, I mean, Herzog is big on urgency, right? We know that that's a huge part of his creative process, is to shoot with urgency, to write with urgency, shoot with urgency, and clearly shooting in such a small way, if you allow that kind of way to describe it. Shooting this small allows you to obviously be as quick as you could possibly be when it comes to making a film.
And you brought this up too, which is this idea of like, I don't think Herzog wanted to wait to get funding for this movie.
No,
like,
he wanted
that his whole point was like, I'm just gonna get my my gear and go out and shoot it, and not wait for somebody to provide me with the budget for a better camera or whatever.
Right.
And again, so perhaps to get into kind of the nitty gritty of it, that was one of the things. So I when I was watching this, there was two movies that came up in my mind that I kind of related this to. One of them was Tangerine, which was shot entirely on iPhone.
Right.
And I think it does a really good job of that. And then the other one was Caché, which is a Michael Haneke movie from 2006, I believe. I think it's 2006. Yeah, 2005. So Haneke, and so that movie is also, it's a movie that is shot on a like professional digital camera, but kind of back in that era where digital
pretty early on
video look still, and is intentionally like that. And the reason that I bring those two movies up is because the subject matter of Tangerine really fits the iPhone. Like, it's embraced within the subject matter. It kind of flows in and out of this very lo-fi. It makes sense to have shot an iPhone. Caché as well is about a man who is like, he keeps receiving videotapes of his house, of just these like hour-long videotapes of just his house from outside, this still footage. And so the movie is shot on the same format that he receives those videotapes in. And the movie is also shot in a way that, every scene is very still and observational camera-wise. So you never really know in the movie, like, is this a videotape or is this... is this just a scene?
Right.
And it's a really smart thing to do, because the entire movie you're spent watching going like, is this being filmed or is this, just a movie? And so the reason I wanted to mention that was because this kind of is the middle ground for me there. And there was things, again, as I said, that worked in some things that didn't work for me.
Yeah.
And so one of the things
about those.
So this reality TV thing really worked for me. I liked that a lot.
Yeah.
So
it's appropriate. That's certainly appropriate to the subject matter in a handful of ways, for sure. I mean,
So when I complain about, I don't even want to say complain, but when I'm like criticizing anything about its technicalities or anything, I'm not critiquing that, saying like every movie has to be shot on an expensive camera, it has to look beautiful, it has to, because I don't believe that. I think that it fits with this subject matter actually quite well to have shot it on the XF405.
Right.
The point that it kind of lost me, or that I kind of felt myself going, was that, not necessarily taken out of the movie, but kind of thinking about it and critiquing it in my mind, was, so there's the moment in the hotel. They go to a robotic hotel at one point, and it's basically our main character is talking to this owner of this robotic hotel about possibly using robots in his own industry, which is this, this rental.
Well, and that's where I almost wonder, do you want to, let's kind of, before we jump in to
sure, let's explain.
Let's kind of explain just a little bit, just in case. Now, obviously, for those listening, this is going to make a lot more sense if you've seen the film. But we'll go ahead and kind of give a little bit of an overview just about, kind of the major points here of the film. So like we've been describing, this film was shot pretty lo-fi and pretty simply. It's a pretty small, intimate story. It takes place in Japan. And basically, and this we're going to kind of get into some of these, is kind of like meta levels of this. The lead in the film is actually, in real life, owns a business called Family Romance, where in Japan they basically rent out friends and family members, right? If your father's not available, and you're, let's say you're a bride and you're getting, you've got your dress fitting or something, and you want your father to go, but maybe he's passed on or he's not available or whatever, you can rent an actor to play your father.
It's a very real, very popular industry there.
And it's growing in popularity. It's spreading to other cultures and countries. And so Herzog was really intrigued by this. Actually, one of his former Rogue Film School students came to him, and then this person is actually listed as a producer on the film. His name is Rock Morin. but basically Herzog was really intrigued by this idea and kind of the, how much of our relationships are genuine versus performance. And, I mean, it's all of these interesting questions that kind of bubble up from that. How much of our, are our relationships genuine and real versus kind of, imagined. And it's just I think the content is extremely intriguing and interesting. And I definitely, we're going to get into that more, but in a nutshell, we follow the owner of this company as he interacts with a handful of his clients. And there's kind of a narrative thread that goes through where he has been hired by this young woman's mother to be her stand-in father. And we see kind of this narrative thread where by the end of the film, the daughter and the mother have fallen for him and actually want him to actually be in their life for real. And he declines, and he says, and I think this is, I really want to talk about this later when we kind of get more into themes and content, but he says, here at Family Romance, we aren't allowed to love or be loved. And I think that's really intriguing concept. And then we follow our lead as he actually goes to his own home, which we've not seen at all during the entire film. And he's hesitant to go in and actually be with and interact with his own family. So so that's kind of the context of just, where we're going to start talking about some things. I just thought that might be beneficial. I didn't mean to interrupt you,
totally.
Colin,
So what's important to note too is that it's that he was going through Herzog was going through a casting process, and decided instead to just cast the real guy. So this real owner of this business was just helping him cast, and then Herzog was like, hang on, why don't I just use you? So then that again comes into this whole reality television thing.
And if I'm not mistaken, weren't some of the other actors in this film, they were from his agency, right?
So anyway, so there's this moment where he's in this robot hotel, which is in Japan. Of course, in Tokyo. And he's talking to the owner, basically saying like, I'm kind of interested in looking at the application of robots, like realistic looking robots for my business. And it's very, it's shot like it feels like that's one of the ones where it feels very, and I only say this documentary in terms of... It
feels like reality TV.
It feels like Herzog's, like it feels like it could be in one of Herzog's nonfiction films.
Okay, which part? You're talking about the robot fish and this
No. When he's talking to the guy.
Okay.
When he's talking to the owner, it's shot like a, because and the reason I'm hesitant to say documentary is because
let's describe it. I mean, let's talk about why. Let's kind of paint a picture for people listening there. Let's get specific. So set the scene here. So we've got our lead character has come into this very small lobby, like you said, robot hotel. And what makes it a robot hotel is that what would you call it? Desk clerk, concierge, I guess.
Yeah, I think everything is robotic. Like room service is robotic.
Clearly fake. I mean, it's like very clearly a rubberized, animatronic kind of robot dude, just constantly saying like, please sign in, like over and over, or something similar to that, not verbatim, but close. And there's this large aquarium over to the side that has these very brightly painted, I guess, are they supposed to be koi fish? Maybe, but they're robotic. They're plastic and metal, and they're machinery. So just to kind of paint a picture of what you're talking about. So let's get into that then. So you were saying,
so again, the reason that I like when I say, as we said at the beginning, it's much more reality television than it is feeling like a documentary. But this particular scene feels like Herzog documentary in that it feels like you could take this scene where he's talking to the owner.
What about
kind of just the floating camera where he's I could replace Mahiro, who is the main character who's talking to this man, with Herzog. Like you could pull out Herzog, or you could put out Mahiro and put Herzog in that situation. And if this were a real documentary that Herzog was making about this robot hotel.
Ishii. Ishii is the man.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Mahiro is the daughter.
Mahiro is the daughter. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. Ishii. If you were to put Herzog in Ishii's shoes there, it would be, and this was a documentary about this robot hotel or something like that, and this was, nonfiction Herzog movie. It would be shot the same way. It would be asking the same questions. It would be, like it was that kind of thing where I was like, this feels like you could put this scene in, for, to relate to our last episode, you could put the scene in Nomad and it would be shot the same way.
Yeah, agreed.
But then there's this moment. So that happens. And then Ishii goes over to this fish tank and it's this robotic, there are all these robot fish. And he's standing there for a good, it must be 2 or 3 minutes of this shot where it's just him looking at these robotic fish. And you've got this very Herzog. It's the same composer of music that did Nomad and has done a ton of other Herzog works. And you've got this music going as he stares at these fish. And so that was
for a very long time. And what
so
makes the shot so significant is that he holds on this.
It's like 3 minutes.
Ishii looking at these robotic fish in this tank for literally like 3 minutes.
Yeah, and so that was the point where I sort of thought, to me at least, you need to, and as we've discussed in our previous episodes, where it's like Herzog specifically says, there's no aesthetic to me. I don't go into my movies going
no conscientious. He's
not. Yeah. So he's like, I'm not going into my movie thinking that I'm going to make the decision to use my aesthetic. Yeah, it just happens. And this was kind of one of those things where, and again, there were a lot of things that I liked about the movie, but one of the things that I thought would have perhaps made it feel more cohesive was really limiting the Herzogisms. These moments where you have this like Gregorian music and these long takes of whether it's him looking at the fish or it's these like drone shots of Tokyo and you've got this Gregorian strings and chant music kind of thing that is very, very Herzog. I thought, that to me pulls me out of this reality TV feeling, pulls me out of this lo-fi, this lo-fi kind of engaging style and seems like it's kind of sitting on the fence of like, do I want to be a more traditional Herzog movie, which of course most of his other movies do have budgets to shoot either on film or larger cinema cameras and things like that.
Yeah.
And so it was one of those things where I was thinking there's these moments where, like there's a few moments like that in the movie where I just thought, if they had perhaps maybe disciplined, like perhaps used a little bit more of a stylistic discipline and gone, I'm going to shoot it like this kind of, and that's why I related it to Cachet and Tangerine, where it's like this stylistic discipline of those movies is very, very clear and very important, because the subject matter is so intertwined with the medium. And for the most part, this movie is as well. Most of the subject matter in this movie is very much intertwined with this lo-fi camcorder look, and it was just these moments, these brief moments of like very Herzog-y kind of again, this fish bit where it's like you hear the chants or these drone shots, or this other moment where they go to the sea and there's this phone, which is actually, we found this out, it's a real thing where there's this telephone on the edge of the ocean.
This particular one is manufactured. It's not.
But it's a real. It's a real
thing, right? Yeah. Where I think it's because like after the tsunami,
I think, right? Yeah.
There's someone established like a phone booth basically to kind of symbolically people could try to call out to those lost family and friends, right, who had been taken by the tsunami. Is that correct? Do I have that right?
Yes, yeah,
and it's
like this. It's like you're calling your your passed away relatives to in the ocean, and
I'm gonna play a little. I'm gonna play a little devil's advocate here because I do want to walk through the film, and I kind of the most interesting aspect of this film for me is what it's saying, are its themes, its content. I know for you too. I know for you too, and we kind of started off talking about some of these technical things to give it some kind of context because obviously it's important too, but. Just knowing Herzog and having seen so many of it, not knowing him personally, I'm not trying to say it, but knowing his work, it's certainly, one of the tactics he uses in his filmmaking is to hold for very long periods of time on things that I think he sees as deranged. That he's, and we've talked about this in the last episode. We went like way in depth with this. And I think when, and I know it works for me. When, and let's use the scene that you had brought up with this fish and, he's literally holding for like 3 minutes on this fish. When I first see it, let's say like if we would have only had this take for 5 seconds, right? He looks at the fish. I wouldn't really think much about the fish. I wouldn't really notice much about the fish, and it wouldn't have any kind of real gravitas or meaning to me. But when he holds on this fish for 3 minutes and I'm forced to look at it, it starts to distort and become gruesome. And I start to see that the paint is all peeled off the sides because it just keeps going back and forth in this tank,
bumping into walls,
bumping into the walls, and it's rubbing all this, like the beautiful kind of, you know, the facade is coming off from around it. And of course, putting this in the context of, you know, the themes that we're exploring here, which is about, you know, about you know, as we are seemingly more connected by technology, we are in fact sinking further and further and further into existential isolation.
Yeah.
And we know that Herzog has a fascination shooting animals in his films, right? You've got the chicken in the vending machine. You've got the lizards. You've got, I mean, in so many of Herzog's films, we see the importance that animals play in his films and his symbology. And there's 2 scenes in this film that are extremely reminiscent of his previous films, but instead of real animals, they're animatronic or robotic animals.
Yeah.
And they're similarly trapped, like many of his animals are when they're filmed, like the chicken in the vending machine. And so I think so for me, it worked.
Well, let me clarify quickly too, to just say it wasn't the length of the shot or the subject matter of the shot that kind of took me out. It was just the stylistic choice. It was like I would not have been it's one of those things where it's like, you know, because I'm thinking about it, I'm taken out of it. And because I'm thinking, okay, why are we suddenly having this Gregorian sounding chant?
I'm going to put you on the spot. I'll put you on the spot then for fun. Yeah, sure. Like what exactly? Let me try to understand. Like what specifically with his technique, kind of removed you from the immersion of the story there in that case?
Well, again, just it was the choice of the music there, that very traditional
Herzog
you felt
music,
the
music was maybe incongruent to.
Had there been, I think, more moments, both with the camera work that was in a similar way of like looking at these things up close, and it felt like it kind of came out of left field, if that makes sense.
And that's valid. Yeah, that's of course that's valid. I'm just curious, kind
of.
No.
You know, it's to me, it's one of those things that's like, you know, again, I'm like, either go all the way with that and have that kind of thing infused through the whole movie, or because when you just put it in there 1 or 2 times, it jumps out and it sticks out. Right. And so again, that's why I mentioned that phone bit. Which kind of, again, I related this to like Bergman in our call yesterday, where it feels like a Bergman moment. If these like people on the edge of the ocean with a phone,
right?
And I said, you know, it's to me like that moment also stuck out to me because I was like, is that, you know, we're going from this reality television kind of feel to suddenly this very art house, like they're on the edge of the ocean with a phone calling out.
Okay,
and of course I didn't know.
I didn't know that it was what you're saying now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're so let me. I'll kind of like say it a different way, and let's see if I'm tracking with you now.
Sure.
So
yeah.
You're kind of like, okay, Herzog has selected by a combination of choice and necessity to shoot this film in a way that's very reminiscent of reality TV style shooting, and there are these certain moments, the robotic fish, the telephone on the beach, that to you felt like a radical shift in tone or style or both, and kind of felt like they're shoving in like an art house film and these scenes into kind of this what we've, you know, kind of this reality TV style that we've had for all the rest of the film around it. Is that kind of what?
Yeah, and it would, again, it wouldn't be, to me, it wouldn't be nearly as like, it's not that I have an issue with that style anyway, because I mean I wouldn't like Herzog so much if I did. It's more that I felt that it needed to be more present in the rest of the movie. And it would be like the equivalent of, you know, someone shooting an entire movie in that style and then suddenly shooting, you know, just 2 of the whatever 30 odd scenes in a movie. 2 of them are shot on sticks with better lenses and better like that would be the equivalent to me of just like, suddenly why are we shifting so much? And I can when I say why, I'm asking that rhetorically. Like, I understand why in the context of the movie it's done.
Yeah.
I just don't necessarily agree with the choice I sound very. I don't mean to sound so pompous there. I don't. I just. Okay. I don't necessarily agree.
Look, it's always.
It didn't work for me. I guess
it's
the
just
best
opinions.
Way to describe it.
Absolutely, yeah. It's like we're totally just opinions, and I don't think anybody out there is going to think. It's not that we're saying. Herzog, get out of here. We're going to jump in your spot and do a better
Actually, you know what? I want to say a challenge to Herzog. Come on this podcast, and I'll tell you how I could have directed this movie better.
That's absolutely not. Well, we certainly would be honored deeply if Herzog were ever on this podcast, and we certainly would never be disrespectful to him in any way. But we're also, we have our own opinions, and
I'd be curious to ask him about it. Like, just honestly, to have a conversation.
Right, we have our own opinions, and we're not going to just love every single thing any filmmaker makes. So your views are totally valid. I just want to. And I
also want to point out there was a lot of things in this movie that I really did like. I thought that it was his work on, like, again, he's, of course, we've talked about this so many times, of his obsession with like the human condition and all that.
So
I think it really comes out here.
Yeah, I love that about this.
One of the reasons is because it is such a, I don't know if you've been to Japan. I've been to Tokyo and Kyoto.
I have not. The closest I've been is Taiwan, which has a large Japanese influence because the island of Taiwan was ruled by Japan for a long period of time. And so there's a significant Japanese influence, but it's very, very different than, actual Japan. So no, I haven't, but I would love to go because I am intrigued by many, many aspects of Japanese culture. So I hope to be able to go sometime in the not too distant future.
So it's a beautiful, like, I like the country, but again, it is so interesting. Like, it's incredibly interesting how different, just priorities in terms of, like, we take our priorities of, like, mental health and social health, and it's like, we've got to go out and see our friends, all this stuff. There's just different standards of priorities in terms of, like, mental health there. And I don't mean like mental health support and funding for that. I mean literally just like what makes people happy, what makes people feel fulfilled is an entirely different thing there than
so tell me, so what made you think of that with this film then?
Well, just for example, I mean, the idea of knowing that somebody is being paid to give you something or to, like, do something for you or to act a certain way as a relationship, come to your wedding as your father when your father's, alcoholic or drunk or something, or be your father when he's been gone for 10 years, that there's an acceptance there. And of course, I'm not trying to generalize for the entire population.
But I'm largely... So this is what I think is so interesting, because I actually think we all do this all the time.
Oh, but I just mean in different ways. That it's the like, here, if this were a business here, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if this was a business here in 50 years, because I think that things are going that way.
I think it is a business here, is what I'm saying. It just doesn't look exactly like this.
Well, exactly. But that's what I mean, is that it's more... Here, things are a lot more about optics in a different way here.
So I understand. People say face different ways. So let's kind of go. I think it would be kind of helpful. We can kind of go through some of these scenes, because I think, there's these vignettes of scenes that kind of happen through the film that would be good to use to discuss some of the themes and the content, some of the stuff you're talking about right now, is differences culturally and So, right off the bat, we jump into the film, and we've got Ishii, who again is our lead. He owns the family romance company, and he does in real life. And just real quickly before I jump into the scene, it's interesting to note too, there's kind of a few meta levels of this that's really interesting. So the New Yorker a few years ago did a story about his company, and in real life. And before Herzog made this film, and I think they wanted the journalist wanted to speak to some of the clients of his business, and so he gave the information of this supposed client for the journalist to go see, and it turned out that journalist was speaking to another actor in the stable of actors of the company. And so you've got this really, and apparently too, so once the journalist found out about that misrepresentation, then the journalist started looking very closely into, all of the statements that had been given. And apparently, and I don't know all the exact details, but apparently there are some really interesting questions about misrepresentation and falsification of details and all this kind of stuff in real life of this person, this Ishii person, and his business. And so I find that very fascinating, because this whole film is talking about what is truth and what is fact and what is fiction. And, Ishii's explanation for why he gave the journalist the actor's address to go interview was because he and this is I'm paraphrasing, and we can only speculate as to what he, if he was just trying to get off the hook or if he really meant it, but he said, I felt like if you were to talk to an actual real client, that client would be kind of embarrassed and would be afraid for their privacy and wouldn't have actually given you the full truth. They would have given you some facts, but they wouldn't have given you the full truth. But if I sent you to an actor, it wouldn't have been factually true, but it would have actually been the full truth.
And you know what? That is exactly what I was saying, is that we have in the West, or at least in, North America and like Western Europe, France, UK, whatever, an obsession with truth. An obsession with factual truth,
with facts,
and so that was where I was trying to say that the difference between like a system like a service like that there is, if I'm the kid and my dad hires someone as my mom, I might know that that's not really my mom, but that doesn't matter because I can just buy into the fact that it's my mom. I don't care that it's not factually true. Whereas here, so on a great, maybe perhaps a really good parallel is there's the moment where the woman there's this lady that wants to be famous on social media and stuff. So she hires these paparazzi to go down the street and take pictures with her. And she's like, this is going to blow me up. I'm going to be so famous because these paparazzi are taking pictures. It'll make everyone think I'm famous. She knows that it's not true. So I worked at the Toronto International Film Festival as a camera operator in 2019. And there was so much of stuff like that, of people that like really had no following on social media, but called themselves influencers, had people like had little groupies around them, but really just like those groupies were probably just their friends. But there was this underlying thing of like convincing themselves that they actually were famous.
Sure.
So that's the difference there, is that in this context and culturally in Japan, it's so much more prevalent that girl knows that she's not famous. She knows that she's looking out for the optics of it, because that's what is going to get her to the point of just that's the happiness to her, is the result. Whereas here, there's an obsession with, like, we have a societal obsession with things having to be factually and absolutely true. So there's someone doing that here would be convinced that they actually were famous, would have to lie to themselves and convince themselves that they actually were, because they couldn't bear.
Well, I think these people are lying to themselves too, but
just in a different way.
Yeah, let's because there's some really cool scenes here that I think present, like the one that you just mentioned. So let's go through some of them, because I think that we can kind of break down this interesting argument in some different ways. So like I was saying, so Ishii, this first scene. And I love how Herzog does this, especially if you come into this film without a ton of information previously. Basically, we see this man and this young girl who are, I think she's about 12 in the film. We see that they're talking in a park, right? And we think like they're really father-daughter. We think that like there's this, and they maybe it's like a reunion, right? They haven't seen each other in a long time. We don't know why, but we don't learn that he's rented, until the next scene, when after this whole long conversation, this like, it's kind of sweet, kind of touching, like it's a daughter kind of warming up to a father that she hasn't seen or known in a long time. And then we move to the next scene where Ishii is meeting with that daughter's mother, and now we find out, and she's paying him for what the interaction that just occurred. I thought that was great. I thought that was brilliant. And and there's so many just interesting levels to that, and like you said, it's like we have this young girl who's kind of, it's interesting. I mean, I think it speaks so much to how we deceive ourselves all the time, and that our life is basically full of our own deceptions, and it kind of has to be, right? We deceive ourselves about our own mortality, because if we didn't, most of us, if not all of us, would kind of lose our minds. We deceive ourselves about how good of a person we are. We deceive ourselves about, it's just layer after layer after layer of deception.
It's ambiguous in the movie too. Do you think that the daughter Mashiro knows that he's
we don't know. That's a good point.
Exactly. Like what
we don't know.
Yeah, and that it's of course left ambiguous, but it's one of those things where, because there's this point where they're kind of lying to each other, where she fakes this whole thing about her being on the beach in Bali.
Yeah.
And it's a lie to Ishii, and then he sort of says, like, I'm lying to her and she's lying to me.
Yeah, it's so intriguing.
But we never find out whether or not she, because at the beginning it's implied that her mother's keeping it from her, because the mother says, her father had a twitch of the eye. So can you kind of fake this? And he says, no, we don't fake things like that, because then it's going to be really obvious that I'm faking it. So clearly there's some kind of bit at the beginning where they're trying to fool her, but by the end you don't really know, does Mahiro know that Ishii's actually just hired, or does and they don't answer it,
but for sure, as we're going to see, I mean, their relationship grows into something that has to be dealt with, right? As we get through the film. But so I thought that was a really interesting way to introduce it. That was kind of a playful, fun way to do it. I think we also get to see some of the like cultural differences of interactions. This like very formal kind of way of interacting, which is just interesting to see. Like when Ishii meets with Miki, this is just it's quite nice. And then we kind of move from that to some of these like side clients, right? So this kind of the Ishii Mahiro is kind of the narrative thread, but then we've got some other clients that we see, and some of these are really interesting. And I think we've mentioned this a little earlier. This next client is basically a young woman's getting married, and her father happens to be an alcoholic. But it's interesting. The mother in the family hires one of the actors and tells them that he's got epilepsy, and that's why he can't be there. And then it's the daughter that reveals to the actor, no, actually, this is really embarrassing, but he's actually an alcoholic. And again, it's just, I think that we're illustrating yet again, and people do this all the time. These deceptions, these self-deceptions, people do this all the time. Parents are in denial about the behavior of their children. Spouses are in denial about the behavior of their spouse. This is extremely common, and even our closest, often it is the closest relationships that we supposedly have with people that are kind of built on this foundation or propped up with all of this deception. And it really is an interesting thing to kind of try to dissect. And I think this is a really cool way to illustrate that with this unique company in this film. But I just thought that was fascinating. And when I don't know if it made you kind of wonder, it definitely made me wonder. I was like, what would I fall into this? I probably would. We think it's kind of weird, but I bet if you hung out with somebody long enough, right? If you hired somebody to be your friend or something, after you spent a couple days with them, you'd probably consider them your friend. Though you were
Herzog
paying
is asked in the interview. Yeah. He did a Q&A for the movie with Mubi.
Oh, I love this. I know.
And he asked the guy, one of the questions is what would you hire someone for if this was and Herzog says, I'd love to speak Bavarian with somebody.
Yeah, and kick a soccer ball around. Yeah. I live in LA. Nobody speaks Bavarian. I'd love to kick a soccer ball around and curse in Bavarian, and somebody would be able to understand me. I love it.
So it's this funny thing where it's perhaps Herzog is bought into more again, and that was kind of my point about the difference between perhaps a North American version of this versus a Japanese version of this is that perhaps Herzog is bought into more of the Japanese the philosophy on it, which is that it doesn't really matter that it's not fundamentally true, and that you can be aware of it and you don't have to convince yourself of the truth. You can it's not not to say that it is. I'm not an endorsement of the psychology of this or whatever, whether or not it's mentally healthy or whatnot, but rather just that there's a different. I just see a different societal takeaway.
It's so
which
interesting.
Is really
I don't
interesting.
see a cultural. For me, I don't see this through any prism of cultural difference in that regard. For me, I don't think that the characters in this film are reacting any differently than I think. I think it speaks to a much more fundamental, for me personally, much more of a fundamental aspect of the human condition that is just the way we are. I don't think it speaks to any kind of like, is it a mental illness or is it this or that, or is it a cultural thing? I really think that this is actually fundamentally how our realities are constructed and how we manage ourselves in the world, that we deceive ourselves it is so fundamental. Our lives are so
fundamentally,
imagined.
Absolutely.
So I guess I don't,
I fundamentally, I agree. I think that the details would be different depending culture to culture. I think the details of it, of like how people go about it, and the specifics of like, I again, just to go back to this idea of like that the girl with the paparazzi, she's convincing herself that she's famous now because she's got the paparazzi. She's hired these paparazzi, but she's not convincing herself that she didn't hire these paparazzi. She's not lying to herself and saying that these paparazzi
I don't know if I get a sense of that or not in this film. I think that these people actually absolutely are convinced of these things in the moment and when they're happening. And here, let me give you an example of why I think this is the case. And it's one of the sweetest scenes and one of my favorite scenes of the film. I really enjoy it. So as we're following Ishii and Mihiro kind of through their arc, one of the other kind of like client stories, if you will, I'll like say it that way. One of the other client stories, we've talked about the bride with her fake father. We talked about the woman who hires the paparazzi. Another one was the woman who comes in to Ishii's office and she's explaining that she once won the lottery. Mm-hmm. And she had never before in her life ever felt like a winner. And this is like really bittersweet and quite sensitive. I really feel that Herzog is at some of his most sensitive here in this scene, in this little story, this vignette. And I think it was very well acted. I think this actress did a fantastic job. But she's explaining how she'd never ever felt like a winner before. And it was like the money meant nothing to her. It was not about money. And she had literally just been spending all of the winnings trying to win again, because it was the first time she had ever felt like a winner. And she was explaining that she had spent, thousands of dollars, and she hadn't been able to replicate that victory. And she realized that, she could likely play the lottery for 100 years and she'd never win. Mm-hmm. And so what she does is that she hires them to surprise her at some future point. And so that's what we cut to. And we see her, she's in her home, knock at the door. But it's really cute how Herzog stages this. I really love it. It's like this, one of the actors is playing like a utility worker. And, it's an actor playing a utility worker who's like,
who's pretending to,
an actor playing the lottery profession, like the lottery
pretending
representative,
to be a
utility. Right. It's kind of a double layers of this, but, he has her like kind of, sign this fake document. And he's like, oh, your name is da-da-da. I can't remember, but oh, your name is what? Oh, guess what? You won the lottery, won. Mm-hmm. Like cheerleaders come out from behind the wall, and Ishii comes out and got one of those big giant checks.
Check, yeah.
And that was such a like sweet, tender, like the look on her face and just this whole, that scene really, really stuck out to me. I think maybe impacted me more than any other scene in this film, because her joy is totally real. And yes, there is a place in her mind where she understands that this is fake, but the joy that she is feeling is so real. Mm-hmm. And so I think that maybe what you're saying, I think both are kind of existing at the same time in each of these characters, where yes, of course, they understand that this is a manufactured situation, that they've paid for this actor, but it doesn't matter, because there's other part of their mind that completely and totally accepts it. And it's how we do everything in life.
And perhaps where we disagree with that, I don't think a scene like that lottery scene would work if this was set in the US. I don't think that would work at all.
And that's okay. Yeah,
because I think that's where I mean
it would.
I think that's what I mean when I say that's where it's the difference of this fundamental. It's like this obsession with truth in like North American culture.
Well, I don't know. So let me push you on that. I'm going to push you on that.
About the money.
I'm going to push you on that, because we live in I like, not to get into politics, but I think I actually disagree with you to a great extent. I think that there is an obsession with what is a fact, but but in kind of an opposite way that you're describing, that anything can be a fact and everything can be a fact, and I can decide what that fact is, and I can make that up for myself. I think that we kind of live in a post-factual culture here in this country, and I think that more than ever before, people are off on their own making up everything.
Perhaps, but I think the making up everything is also convincing themselves that this is true.
That's right? Exactly what
I think but I think that that's the difference. I think there's a fundamental difference in this type of truth that you're dealing with in Japanese culture. I think
that every person that deceives themselves, that there's a duality in every mind.
Oh yeah, I agree with you there. I just think that the duality is different. I think that there is the reason I don't think that casino scene or the lottery scene would work if this movie was set in the U.S., if there was like an American remake, God forbid. Is because I think that there is, again, I don't see anybody ever do, like, I don't see the priorities, and that's kind of what I meant when I said that, like, visiting Japan was very interesting and very, enlightening about the differences, because the priorities are just different. What makes a person happy is just different, and the things that people go out of their way to do to get happiness is different. Mm-hmm. So like in a scene like that lottery bit, to me, the reason that is so like very, very Japanese in a way, is because, again, it's very much about the result of winning the lottery, exterior from the money, like she says. Whereas we live in a society where a lot of things are simply about monetary gain, but also the truth that comes with that monetary gain and stuff like that. So it wouldn't. Yeah, I mean, again, I go back to that analogy of when I was doing this stuff at TIFF, and it's like the people there, they had convinced themselves and lied to them. Like they would go as far to say that, like, these people aren't my friends, they are my fans, they are my groupies. Even though they have like 500 followers on Instagram, and they would talk like that, and they would absolutely convince themselves 100% of this truth and lie to themselves the entire way. Whereas you look at this scene where she's talking to the paparazzi, she's very aware. She's not hiding it. She's
those people that you're describing at TIFF, and not that we need to beat this dead horse.
No,
but
yeah.
You know that they understand that it's not true.
But people can convince themselves of lies.
But there's always.
They'll know that it's true. They don't believe that it's true. And they don't believe that that's the difference, is that they're refusing to believe, and they will not admit for their life of it.
That's okay, and we can disagree. I think that they absolutely, in their heart, in the middle of the night when they're lying in bed.
Of course they do. Of course they do. But they would never admit that. They would never admit that, and they would not convince themselves of that. Whereas in the scene in Japan, she's very openly admitting that it's fake. She's talking to them very much, with the knowledge that she hired them. Whereas here it would be totally different. Yeah. That entire scene would play out completely differently. That scene would play out as someone who'd hired that happened to them, surprise them on the street or something, right?
It might, but I think the fundamental human condition that this speaks to, I think, is universal.
Yes, yeah. And I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm not disagreeing with the fundamentality of the themes. It's more like I said, the details of culture that to me, really are what makes this movie really interesting to me. It's just that, again, I don't think that you could shoot this movie elsewhere. In present day, I think that this movie is a fundamentally Japanese story.
Okay, that's an interesting take. It certainly, the culture is important to the story. I don't know that I'm convinced that you couldn't tell this story somewhere else, but
I think you could tell a similar story. I think you could tell. Okay. You could take that fundamental truth of it, and you could take that theme of lying to yourself and convincing yourself of, like, these lies, and going so far as to hire somebody to play somebody else in your life, etc. I just think that the details and the cultural connotations, of course, would be completely different, because it would be an entirely different culture. But I think within that, I think the psychology of it is completely different too, and the outlook on it is different. And that's why I think, again, that's why I look at this movie and think, like, this is a very fundamentally at its core, a lot of what it deals with is stuff that is like embedded in Japanese culture, which I think is really interesting.
So I'm just curious to you. So, so again, just to kind of, I want to try a different angle with you. So, I mean, sure. When Herzog's talked about this film, he doesn't say I was interested in Japanese culture. I'm curious about a Japanese story. I think, there's no mention at all of
but he shot it there
as a filmmaker. But I think, but what I did hear from him is that he is endlessly interested in this idea of self-delusion, performance versus reality, and how our relationships are constructed and maintained, and just how ultimately, like, every aspect of our life and every memory you have is kind of this imagined narrative that really is no basis in any kind of objective truth. So, I don't know, so I think maybe you're right. There's clearly, I definitely would clearly this is a film that's made, obviously it's made in Japan, and clearly this is a phenomenon, this very specific thing of having a company that you can hire family or friends out from that's clearly something that did start in Japan. I think it was probably one of the first places, but I think only in a very literal sense. I think if you extrapolate this idea even just a tiny bit, you see how these things occur everywhere. It's just not exactly dressed up like this,
But I think, that's also, like, I'd like to reiterate too that there's very much, this theme of this movie is very much universal, and it very much exceeds the bounds of just Japan.
But it does.
I just think honestly, it's not even a negative to me. It's more of a positive, because I would be interested to see how different cultures would take this idea.
That's all true.
And so that's why I mentioned this idea of like I think that paparazzi scene would go differently if it was a movie
possible.
set in
it's possible.
North America or in Europe or in,
I don't know if it would be like materially different, but I'm sure that it would, that the specifics of it would probably look different.
I think that there would be a difference in just perhaps not to go on about this for too much longer, but I think that
because I think we've gone on long enough.
But I to me think, like, again, that's a positive to me, to think that this how would this shape out differently in different societies, and just generally how
Well, what are the other scenes? So let's try to move on though, so we don't. I think we kind of get in a place where we're saying the same stuff over and over a little bit. So let's move on to a couple of the scenes that we haven't talked about yet. Another scene that I really enjoyed and was kind of one of my favorites was the train station scene. So we know that Herzog stole this scene, and he kind of tells a story about how he had to steal the shot and run away from the security or the employees there at the train station. And apparently Japanese take very, very, very seriously their train stations and being on time and everything. But it's just so interesting because we cut into the scene. Now, again, this is another one of those kind of like the side client stories, if you wish, that's off of the Mahiro Ishii story, where there's an employee. Well, it's actually, we start off where Ishii is being just like railed on by berated by the like supervisor. He's clearly like a train station supervisor, and he's like, how in the hell did you let this happen? You let the train leave 20 seconds early. That's the worst thing that you could have done. It just screws up everything, and
it's even worse than going 20 seconds late.
It separated all these kids from their parents. Oh my gosh, and it's hysterical. And like Ishii gets down on his hands and knees, and he's like, very like, and finally the supervisor leaves, and Ishii gets back up, and there's this other guy standing there, and he's like, oh, thank you so much for taking taking all of that for me. It's like, oh my gosh, I wouldn't have been able to have handled all of this berating had you not been there for me. And I was like, this is so interesting. It's like, that's something. And so, your point is definitely valid. There are cultural differences here, and how people interact with their supervisors, and how people perceive their job positions and their responsibilities as an employee. There are a lot of different cultural things here. There's no question. But this was so interesting. I would have never thought of this, like how you can hire someone to take shame for you was such an interesting concept. So I don't know if you had any specific thoughts about that scene, but I just thought
no,
it was
I like
really
that.
interesting.
Yeah, I actually, it's interesting because I at first was again kind of thinking that it's a series of vignettes and some I liked more, but I actually, the more I thought about that scene, the more I liked it, the more I kind of appreciated its place in the bigger picture of the whole movie.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of a series of vignettes, and I almost feel like, it's just Herzog is kind of, using this kind of motif, hiring people to kind of pretend that they have a relationship with you, and how different ways that could all play out, so that we can
see the toll it takes on Ishii too.
And right, so that's a good point. So in the narrative, the whole kind of narrative through with Mihiro and Ishii, so eventually, and this is interesting, the mother and the daughter parallel each other in their experiences with Ishii, right? So you've got the daughter, Mihiro, is starting to fall for him in some way, and I mean, and we don't really know if it's like necessarily romantic, or if it's just kind of a, she wants him to actually be his father. It's kind of vague, and it might be a little mixture of both, like a childhood crush kind of thing. But the mother also starts to fall for him, and that's very clearly, at least she tries to seduce him romantically. But it's probably not that very different of a set of feelings that the daughter has. They're just wanting companionship, and they've spent enough time now with Ishii that they like have genuine feelings for him, and that his presence removes some loneliness from their lives, right?
And again, unclear whether or not Mihiro knows that he's
correct,
an actor. It's unclear if she's
the mother
actually
Miki
at this point
does, obviously.
But
you're right.
Mihiro is unsure as to, it's unsure for the audience as to whether she actually thinks this man is her father, or if she's looking at him as just a replacement and a father figure.
And I think that, and the point is, what does it matter?
Exactly.
That's, I think, the point is that's the whole kind of blurring of this. And I think Herzog, and I have a lot of respect for Herzog as a writer, because I think it's easy to kind of miss some of these really sweet and tender and subtle ways that he lays out this story. And I think there's some really good examples of how he does that here. Because, of course, it's, as I understand it, there are a lot of improvisations here, but that Herzog scripted, the significant points, right, that had to be hit in each interaction or each conversation, each dialogue segment. So I think the interplay of Herzog kind of knowing where he wanted to take the story, and the actors, I think actually it's really commendable. I think they really did a good job. But I love this kind of this paralleling of Mihiro. So I love this moment where, what was it? They go, was somewhere where she's making a wish, right? Isn't it? So I think they're looking out at the boats at the on the water with like the floating candles, and they're just talking about making a wish. And we really get the sense, the way it's shot and the tenderness of it, that she's wishing something about him being in her life. And there's this really wonderful moment where, and you'd mentioned the telephone on the beach, where Miki does the same thing, where she picks up the phone and she kind of has this private conversation, and Ishii asks, oh, did you call? Who did you call, or something? Because mostly it's like a symbolic way to call the dead. Yeah. But she's like, no, I actually tried to call someone who's living. And you really get a sense that that Miki's doing the exact same thing that Mihiro was. And he just really parallels this in I think a nuanced, beautiful way. That I think a lot of filmmakers would have been a lot more explicit. They would have been a lot more on the nose. And I saw a lot of tenderness from Herzog as a filmmaker in this. And again, and with the woman, the lottery winner, I felt like that was really tenderly handled by Herzog. So I really enjoyed that story too. And then, of course, we get to this kind of the climax of that. Well, I don't mean to, no pun intended, there's no climax, but where, he eventually tells the mother, hey, your daughter, this is going too far. She wants to start spending weekends with me. This is too far. And then she moves on then to try to seduce him. Well, you should move in with us. Our house is so nice. And then she's late, right? She's sitting on the bed, and she's got this really beautiful dress on, and she's like, anything in here, you can do whatever you want with. Yes. I mean, so very, very, very clearly trying to seduce him, even sexually. And he refuses. He's like, I'm sorry, I can't do that.
Yeah, it's like and he says it's such a business. He's like, it's not my contract, basically.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's right, which is so interesting, right? And it is interesting. I mean, I'm sure you have experiences in your personal life. I do too, where especially like if you're working with someone, you have a professional relationship, and professional versus personal. It's just, I mean, these kind of the human relationship kind of thing is just, it's so many interesting ways that we manage our relationships. But I thought that was really wonderful. And then
again, I would totally, like I would recommend checking it out for that alone. Like those moments like that, and perhaps to finish off so that people can jump ship if they don't want to hear about the really technical stuff. I do want to kind of like, I made a list of kind of funny, not necessarily technical gags, but just things that I thought were kind of stuck out to me. Like there's moments again, and these are things that really like the movie, I think, succeeded in making me enjoy it past them. But like moments like you can see there's definitely some post warp stabilization, which is basically just stabilizing footage from like a shaky camera in post production,
because it's such a small camera, and it was all handheld, so you get these like micro shakes. Yeah,
exactly. And so but there's moments where in the warp, like, you can see the frame of the image coming into the shot and stuff like it being readjusted, which is not a huge deal, just kind of funny things that I noticed.
And it's rarely seen. I don't actually know that I've ever seen the edge of the footage come into the frame like that, but I definitely have seen signs of warp stabilization used in other professionally
huge
shot
movies too. 1917, the Sam Mendes movie, the one shot World War I movie that just came out last year. Had like it. I didn't really love the look of that movie because it looked like the entire movie had a warp stabilizer over it.
It kind of gets a liquidy look in areas,
and like things will wobble out of
Yep.
But no, I just, and like there was things like with the just the color grades and stuff that kind of stuck out to me. But again, the movie succeeded in keeping me interested.
In spite of these technical limitations. And I think, and I could add too, I mean, there were a lot of areas that were blown out. There was a lot, really hot lights on actors' faces, and white shirts blown out, and skies blown out, and a lot of technical things like that. But here's what I think is cool. I mean, you shoot with what you've got.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that Herzog goes out there, and I think, first and foremost, the content is king. Like, what's the story, and what are you, and that's why you're here. The story that you're telling, the parts of the human condition that you want to explore in your film, that's why you do this. I mean, I also love, I want to make a film as beautiful as I can make it, or as appropriate to the story as I can make it, I guess. But I think if anything, if you're out there and you're an aspiring filmmaker, this is an example of how you can tackle a really interesting subject with a very bare minimal equipment and crew and cast, and do
very likely just Herzog, probably a few other PAs and kind of production people and the actors. Like, I don't think there were probably no boom mics. There was certainly no boom mics. There was no
you don't have grips, you don't have it's grips,
like
all this stuff. He didn't have a DP, he didn't have, so in that sense, I think that's like a really empowering an example that should be empowering to other filmmakers. So yes, I mean, there's some technical shortcomings for sure, and it's not up to a level of fit and finish and polish that you would normally see in a even in Herzog's own backlog there. I mean, you usually see a much more kind of finished product. But
and I mean, it's like, I'll say off the bat, in terms of like visuals, certainly not one of his more beautiful movies. There are shots in here that I actually really liked.
There are.
But for the most part, it's shot on a camcorder. You're not going to get the beautiful dynamic range or anything like that. You're and again, also for the most part, the movie does embrace that. Like, that is kind of within the realm of the subject matter, is that it's not supposed to be big and beautiful and
right.
It's not like a Malick movie.
I mean, the subject matter is intimate. the way it's shot is very intimate, so I think it's appropriate. But yeah, I mean, so overall, you know, and we've talked about a lot of stuff here. We debated a little bit about cultural differences.
Yeah, it was fun.
and how this film does or does not maybe, you know, affected by them or represent them. And I think overall, though, you can see, I mean, it inspired us to have a lot of questions. And so if you haven't seen it, I think it's absolutely worth seeing. I don't think that it's in the top tier of Herzog's repertoire, but I think that it's certainly worth seeing, and I think the questions that it explores are absolutely vital questions. And I think as we move forward into more and more technology, greater and greater acceptance of social media, and you know, just being further and further removed from actual physical human interaction, and look at this last year, most people around the world have been more isolated than they've ever been. So I think we haven't mentioned that, but I think that makes this film extremely pertinent and timely. But you know,
and really, as somebody said, I heard someone say in an interview once too, that it's like, and I'm paraphrasing here, but even the Herzog movies that I don't fall in love with are 100 times more interesting than anyone else. You know, that he's got such
a lot more interesting than a lot. Absolutely,
there's so much subtext here. There's so much to read into and to really like tear apart here and pick apart in terms of like, what does it mean? What is it saying? So it's a movie that says something, and that's you know,
and has a point of view, and that's what matters most. All right, well. Whew, that was a good one, man. Well, that's exciting. I think we could probably wrap up now, unless you have any final thoughts. But I think we pretty much hit on just about everything we wanted to hit on. But actually, we do have something like we could take like a little bit of a left turn here if you want. Because you had shared something that you've been working on with me.
I forgot again to bring.
We've got time. Yeah, if you feel like you've got time,
I can just quickly go over it. Yeah,
we can go over it because I think it relates to this film in the sense that you're talking about working digitally and trying to emulate film and give yourself a creative option when you do work digitally. So you've done some really cool work. Why don't you just kind of like lay it out?
Yeah, I mean, basically 3 or 4 years ago, I wanted to figure out how working with the budget that I had to make things look larger than, in terms of budget-wise, than they were. And that wasn't the sole thing. Like, I really like the look of film. I think that it's like a really beautiful medium to shoot on.
Yeah.
And so I just started developing this process that has taken me like 3 years to develop, which was just basically trying to replicate the look of film. And what would someone traditionally look at film and think that looks like film? Yeah. And I went through a whole bunch of different phases of it, of like trying to replicate specific stocks. And I basically landed on, okay, you know what? Screw the idea of replicating individual stocks. I'm just going to pull things from different stocks that I really like, and put them all into one process. And so I just released that the other day, which is on my website. It's postromopictures.com.
Yeah.
If you're interested in looking at it, and if that's kind of up your alley. But yeah, and it's basically a film emulation process, so that you can shoot digitally and make it look like you've shot on film. And again, it's not like, for me, it's not just an aesthetic thing.
Now, is this a plug-in or?
No, so it's a LUT. So what I released was a LUT. But it works with, there's a whole bunch of different emulation plugins like Dehancer, like Film Convert, that I've designed it to work with.
Perfect.
But you can also work it on your own. It's free, so
that's fantastic. Well, I've seen it, and I think it looks really interesting. I mean, I'm like super intrigued. I can't wait until I get a chance to play with it myself. But I really think that you've done some great work there, and it's
thanks.
Just another like another tool in the toolbox of expression, and the fact that it's free, I'm like. It's amazing, man.
Yeah, go take it.
Yeah, so thanks for doing all that work. All right. Yeah, well, I think we'll wrap up then. But as always, man, I've totally enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah,
I love it when we kind of have like slightly different perspectives or views, and we can kind of like go at it a little bit and like hash it out. It's fun. Well, it's because it's like I wasn't thinking of it as much from a cultural like differences place, but I don't totally hear what you're saying. You've been to Japan and you're right. Now I think about it, there definitely does speak to a lot of interesting, unique aspects of Japanese culture. Maybe I kind of tend to like universalize things in my own mind, but I totally see what you're saying. So it's a bunch of fun ways to look at things, different ways to look at things. So that's good stuff, man. All right.
Totally.
All right. Well, we'll wrap it up. Until next time, everyone. Thank you so much for hanging in there for this like extra long episode.
Yeah, this is an extra long episode. Yeah.
We hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone.